Welcome to the Tenet Podcast. My name is Todd Pearson, and I'm here in Denver, Colorado with my good friend and partner, Wes Brown.
Wow, it's been how many months? 5 months?
I used all my fingers on one hand to count them up.
It's been 5 months since we've been together. This is feeling great, and this is going to be an awesome interview. I'm looking so forward to this. So
absolutely,
it's good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, it's good to see you too, man. 5 months is a long time, and it's hard to believe it's been 5 months since we've done this in person.
Right.
We're downtown Denver at the Ritz-Carlton in a suite that our next guest has arranged, and we really appreciate the time that he's giving us today. Our guest today is Dennis Scholl. Dennis is a art collector, entrepreneur, philanthropist, award-winning documentary filmmaker, a winemaker. He practices law. He's been a CPA and a real estate investor. Dennis, how are you?
It's good to be in the Mile High City with you guys.
Yeah.
It's my first time out of Miami in 5 months also. I've been hunkered down pretty good down there.
Oh my gosh. You said that flying here wasn't actually too bad. It was just negotiating the airport.
Yeah, Miami is a bit of a lawless town sometimes. And there's a lot of rebellion to the face mask situation. And so, a lot of people in the airport not wearing masks, very uncomfortable. Plane itself was great. You don't have a mask, you don't get on. You don't wear the mask, you don't get on. And so flight was fine, but it's a tough time right now. We're all struggling and trying to find a way to get back to our lives, and it's not happening quickly.
Yeah.
No, patience is a virtue, I think, in this day and age. Before we get into the meat of the interview, I always love to hear the backstory. Like, you're originally from Florida. You grew up in Miami. Is that correct?
I was born in Jersey, but I came to Miami when I was very young. I was like 8 years old.
Okay.
And so I grew up in Miami. I was a blue collar kid. I grew up on the water, fishing, diving, water skiing, not snow skiing. And scuba diving for spearfishing and things like that. So I really grew up on the water in Miami.
Growing up, were you interested in art?
Not at all. Didn't have any cultural exposure at all. Hadn't been to a visual art museum until I turned 22. And there was this little one-room museum in my university, which was in Miami, called Florida International University. The president of the university tells the story over and over again. But I went there one day in between classes, and there was something about the cool white box and the idea of three objects on a wall suddenly meaning something more collectively than they did separately. And as a kid, when I grew up, I was an inveterate collector, collected stamps, collected coins, didn't really know much about it, but there was something very soothing, I guess, to me about the idea of creating a set of things, at least in my mind, that if I had three of these, or if I had all of the coins that were minted from 1943, it meant something. And so collecting was always in my brain, but art was not. I didn't have any cultural exposure growing up. Never been to the opera, never been to the ballet, never been to the symphony. And Miami, frankly, before the exiles came from Cuba, they really made us a world-class city. When the Cuban community came to Miami, everything changed. Everything got more sophisticated. So, I didn't have any exposure to the visual arts at all growing up.
And that's very different from where you are currently, right now in the world. All the things that you have, all the irons that you have in the fire, and being an art collector and working for the promotion of arts with different organizations.
Yeah, I think that if you come to it late, you come to it maybe a little more zealously. It's like being a born again, I think. But for me, I'm a born again visual arts crusader. So yeah, I do love the visual arts. It is a huge part of my life. Collecting art in particular has been, other than staying with my wife, and we just celebrated our 39th wedding anniversary this week. Other than that, the only other consistent thing in my life has been the collecting of visual art.
Wow. And congratulations on 39 years of marriage.
Yeah,
That's
thanks.
phenomenal,
That's incredible.
especially in this day and age. But
My friends were all writing me and they kept saying, do you know how lucky you are? I finally had to do an Instagram post with a picture of Deborah. And I said, yes, I know how lucky I am. Stop writing me.
Oh, that's awesome.
That is awesome. So let's, there's a few different topics we want to touch on today with the time that we have with you. The first is your work in the arts. You've worked tirelessly to promote the arts, and you've worked for a couple, you've sat on numerous boards and committees, and you've worked for some big art organizations. Can you talk to our listeners or tell our listeners what kind of work you've done?
Sure. I've got almost 40 years of being involved in the visual arts, the first 25 as a patron. I went on my first museum board when I was 25. I had a client when I was a lawyer who put me on the board of what's called the Low Art Museum, which is part of the University of Miami campus. And my wife Deborah and I both were, it was our first exposure to service that way. And we loved it. We enjoyed it immensely. And as time went on, we continued to serve on various boards of art museums. And then we got interested in alternative spaces where it's not quite as maybe as big as a museum, but it's more grassroots, helping artists directly. And so I was the founding chair of an organization in Miami called Locust Projects. And I did that for quite a while. And then I left. And my wife, Deborah, has actually been the chair the last 10 years. So that's been a real constant in our life. I've served on the board since we're out in Colorado. I've served on the board of the Aspen Art Museum. I went on that board when it was directed by a wonderful guy who you guys have spent some time with, a guy named Dean Sobel, who is now the director of the Clyfford Still Museum. Dean was just fun to work with, always a blast, and very, very inside the contemporary art world. I've just finished serving 9 years on the Perez Art Museum, which is our big leading museum in Miami. And then about 13 years ago, I actually stopped being an entrepreneur. I stopped trying to make money, frankly. I just reached a point where I was looking for something else. And I took a job in philanthropy. I went to work for one of the largest foundations in America. It's called the Knight Foundation, Knight. The Knight brothers were the largest owners of newspapers in America in the 1970s. And they sold at the right time, by the way. The endowment at the Knight Foundation is over $2.5 billion. And I signed up to go there and to build a national arts program for them. And it was unbelievable. I spent 7 years doing it. During that 7 years, I was honored to work with a great team to give away over $200 million to the arts in all arts, not just the visual arts, across America, in some of the cities where the Knight brothers had owned newspapers, like Charlotte and Detroit and Philly and Miami, of course. And I did that for about 7 years. And subsequently, I took a little time off to make films. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But and then recently, about 3 years ago, I became the president and CEO of an arts organization in Miami, which is now called Oolite Arts. It's a very long-standing visual arts organization in Miami. It was founded in 1984. And that organization does, we think of ourselves as the support system for visual artists and filmmakers in Miami. We have a residency where we have 14, 15, 16 artists on site working in studios for free for up to 2 years. We also do a lot of public programming where we bring in very important curators to talk about their practices. And then we ask those curators to stay an extra day or two and go around the Miami community and do studio visits with artists. Other than selling work, the most important thing an artist can have is access to those major international curators. So we ask them to stay a day or two and hang out with our artists. We do a lot of different things. We give away a lot of money to artists to fund their dream projects. And it's been a joyful experience. It's really great to work just with visual artists, do it directly, and to do it in my hometown. You know, the 305 has been my place for, 56, 57 years now. And I really love the art scene there. And even though I spend a lot of time in the international art world, it is a joy to be able to give back in Miami.
So you've done all this philanthropy work. I saw when you were with the Knight Foundation that you had implemented a program where you were doing like these pop-up art events.
Yeah.
And I thought that was what a cool idea. And especially, I think in this time with the pandemic, people are missing their regular outlets for art. Talk a little bit about that and how that all came about.
Sure. So when I was at Knight, we were always looking for something that could bring people to culture in a way that it didn't feel difficult. We wanted them to encounter culture without having to go be at the symphony at 8:00 on a Saturday. And God forbid you should open up a cough drop or something, and the blue-haired lady in front of you would look at you for the crinkle, that kind of thing. So we were trying to figure out what to do. And I was at the office one day and somebody sent me this YouTube video, and I put it on. I said, you got to watch this. You're going to really like this. And I put it on, and it was in Valencia, Spain. And there was a guy behind a counter selling fruit. And I watched it for a second. I was about to turn it off. And all of a sudden he breaks out into this aria, singing opera at the marketplace in Valencia, thinking, this is cool. And then suddenly across the aisle, the woman selling coffee begins to sing back to him. And they both step out from behind their respective stalls, move into the center and into the courtyard, and they begin to sing to each other, and a crowd begins to gather. And then 6 people walk out of the crowd and begin to sing too. And at the end of it, I mean, the tears are streaming down your face. And then some very smart person holds up a sign that says, so you think you don't like opera, huh? And that to me was like, oh my gosh. And I said, what if we took the idea of a visual art experience and we paid working professional artists to do it over and over and over again? And so we did. I went to the board of the Knight Foundation and I said, hey, we're going to do this. And they were like, great, that sounds great. And I said, and we're going to do it 1,000 times. Well, I could have promised them 100 times and they would have never known the difference. But, in that kind of go big or go home moment, I said 1,000 times, but we did. And we immediately started to do this program called Random Acts of Culture. And in it, you would go to the airport and suddenly ballerinas would start pirouetting down the concourse. We went to our government building and we had a quartet without identifying themselves, just casually gathered together and begin to play. That was the very first one we did. And we filmed it. Didn't matter whether we filmed it or not. By the time we got back to the office, the people who happened to be there, and of course, we now are all videographers. Everybody had whipped out their camera phone. It was already up on the web and it was already garnering incredible likes. The big one we did was in a Macy's in Philadelphia with the Philadelphia Opera. And they had gotten 600 choral members in the community to quietly just move into Macy's one day at 1:00 on a Saturday. And they sang the Hallelujah chorus. And we filmed it and we put it out there. And it was one of those moments where you just struck a chord internationally and it began to gather momentum. And the last time I checked, I think we were at 10.3 million YouTube views. Now, those are Lady Gaga numbers. Those aren't opera numbers or choral music numbers. And so, we were on CNN and, we were on ABC, NBC, CBS. We got all sorts of requests. And so we kept doing them and doing them and doing them across America. And the great thing that happened with it is that the organizations that we asked to participate, and we paid them, we paid the artists. You always have to pay the artists. That's the most important thing in working with artists. A lot of times people say, oh, well, this will be good for you. What's good for artists is if you pay them. So we paid every artist every single time. But the organizations were getting so much out of it that even after we completed our Random Acts of Culture, and we wound up doing almost 1,400 of them, they kept doing them. It became just this kind of organic, fluid thing. So it was an amazing, amazing experience. I made a short film about it. I made a half-hour film about it. And actually, if you go to my website, schollcreative.com, you can actually see the Random Acts of Culture film. So it's a really fun fun film. And it was definitely one of the most fun things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah. So I got a question about documentary films. I love watching documentary films, but a lot of times you really have a hard time finding them. So where did documentary films go once the director and the producers have put this out?
Yeah.
Where do they go?
Well, things have changed a lot. I've been making documentary films now for about 13 years. And when I started, it was very, very difficult to get a home for documentary film because where did Spider-Man go? Spider-Man would come out. It would go to the big megaplexes. It would play for weeks and weeks and months. And then it would either go to television or it would go to streaming. But documentary films didn't have those theatrical releases, and that's where everybody pays attention. But now, luckily, we're in the golden age of documentary filmmaking. I feel so fortunate that I can make a film, and if it's good enough, people can see it now. I have a film right now that's on Netflix called The Last Resort about the very elderly Jewish population in South Beach, where I grew up in Miami, and what happened to them over the time. That film played a bunch of film festivals, and then it was picked up for distribution. It did have a theatrical release, which is very unusual for a documentary. And then it went to Netflix, where it lives on and anybody can see it. So it's much different now than it used to be. And streaming has been a democratizing opportunity for documentary filmmakers. And we, as an audience, in America as an audience, we're much more welcoming to documentary films now than we were a decade ago. So it's a great moment.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you have the Clyfford Still documentary called Lifeline, and that's living on. We can purchase it on Prime, where actually Todd and I both watched that off of Prime. But
yeah. Well, we're in Denver. I guess we should talk about Clyfford Still.
Absolutely.
So going back to my art experience, Clyfford Still, as an art collector, I didn't really know much about art, and I was learning very quickly. But at the age of about probably 23, 24 years old, I went to the Met for the first time, the Metropolitan Museum in New York on Fifth Avenue. And I walked in there and I walked around, and I wasn't that interested in the Roman stuff or the Greek stuff. I was a contemporary art guy. And I walked into this room and I saw the Clyfford Still paintings, and I was gobsmacked. I had never seen anything like it before. I didn't understand it. That's the best art, when you don't get it, or you have a visceral reaction, either positive or negative. I just stood before it and I couldn't believe it. And he became my favorite artist, was always my favorite artist. And, basically 35 years later, Dean Sobel, the director of the Clyfford Still Museum, gave me the opportunity to make a documentary about Clyfford Still. And I thought he had been kind of misunderstood in his career. And his wife had done him pretty much of a disservice after he passed by not letting anybody see the work, by not allowing reproductions. She owned the copyright. And so he disappeared from the history books of art. If you opened up an art history book, he wasn't in there. And for my money, I believe Clyfford Still was the greatest painter of the 20th century. Pollock was a great painter, but he had better press than Clyfford Still. There are other people you could point to who are pretty great, but I really believe Clyfford Still is the greatest painter of the 20th century. And of course, Denver is so fortunate to have the Clyfford Still Museum. And it came here on the oddest of circumstances. But the opportunity to get to make that film was really special for me, because how often do you get to make films about your absolute heroes? Normally, those films get made by people that are way more important documentary filmmakers than I am. And that's been the nicest thing about my documentary filmmaking practice. A film like Lifeline, the Clyfford Still film, or a film like Singular, about a wonderful jazz singer named Cecile McLaurin-Salvant, who has won 3 of the last 4 jazz Grammys for vocals. I get to make what I want to make because I just find a way to get it done. So it's been great. I love doing it.
So the process of, like, if we just take Lifeline, so Dean called you with this opportunity. Did you reach out to the family to get, because I know you've done interviews with them. How did that all kind of transpire?
Well, so first of all, Dean didn't reach out to me. I begged Dean. And Dean didn't know me as a filmmaker. He knew me as a patron and an art collector. And so when I said I was making films, Dean was like, yeah, sure. Great, Dennis. Thanks. But luckily, I had made a couple of films by then. I was about 6 or 7 years into my filmmaking career. And I sent him a couple of films. And a lot of people don't know, but Dean is a hardcore rock and roll guy.
Oh.
He's a hardcore, I mean, he knows everything. And so I sent him a film I had made about soul music in Miami in the 1960s called Deep City. There was this group there, a production group. It was the first African-American owned record company in Florida. And so I sent him that. He said, this is pretty good. I said, well, thanks, Dean. I said, can I make the Clyfford Still film? And he said, I guess. And the funniest thing was there's a wonderful filmmaker in town, Amy, who in Denver, who had made a Clyfford Still film right when the museum opened. It was pretty much a chronological story. And a lot of times, if you're a filmmaker, you wouldn't want to retread that water. But I knew that what we were going to do was going to be very different. It was going to be more a psychological profile of a guy who I thought was misunderstood and was really, really important, but not appreciated as such. And so we began to do the work. And then very early in the process, I was getting a little concerned because if your protagonist, it has passed, and you're making a film about visual art, which doesn't move around much and doesn't say much, you're kind of in trouble. And I got a little nervous. And then I got this wonderful phone call from Jessie De La Cruz, who was at that time the archivist at the Clyfford Still Museum. And she said, "You're not going to believe what we found." I said, What? She goes, 34 hours of audio tape of Still talking about the art world and 28 minutes of videotape. And I was like, oh, there is a God. So that was really the moment that changed everything for the film. I would have made a film. I think it probably would have been okay. But with the audio tape, with the video, we were able to humanize Still. And that was something that hadn't happened before because his paintings are very brusque and jagged and craggy. And you look at him and he's very patrician and, like a tough dude. But when you hear him talking to his wife about the Metropolitan Museum curators offering him 3 galleries or the entire floor if he wants, and you can hear the joy and the glee in his life. And you watch the Super 8 films, which are really like clickbait for nostalgia. When you watch those Super 8 films, you know that this is a human being and this is a guy who cares about his family. Now, the family was interesting because there are 2 daughters, and Sandra, I called up and I said, would you be willing to meet with me? And she said, sure. I flew to Phoenix. She lives in a suburb outside of Phoenix. We met at the Phoenix Art Museum. And I said, I'd like to make a film about your dad. And she went right away. She went off and said, he's very misunderstood. People don't know. But, she went on and on and on. And I thought to myself, this is going to be great because she channels her father. When she speaks, if he didn't like something, she didn't like something. She's encyclopedic about the history. She was there for the meetings with the dealers and the collectors who were trying to get him to sell work and everything. So she was great. And I said, wow, this is going to be great. And then I reached out to Diane, the other daughter. And she said, not interested. Waited a year, not interested. Second year, not interested. At the end of 3 years, her daughter, Still's granddaughter, came to London for the big abstract expressionist show where they finally lent 9 Still paintings for the first time ever. And I met the granddaughter and I said, look, I've been trying to get your mom to talk to me for 3 years. She goes, yeah. She says, I'm going to get her to do it. I said, great. I figure if your daughter asks you, you're going to do it. So she goes home and she calls me back about 2 months later. She goes, nah, my mom won't do it. so I'm like, okay, we're still going to make the movie. And then about a year later, very late into the film, we had been editing and everything. She calls me up and she says, my mom will talk to you now. And my first question was, and I said it in a very kind of sardonic way, like, why? As I wasn't sure, like, why would she? Right. She says, I don't know. She said, I think there's some kind of catharsis going, that she's looking for. And so I got my crew and I flew to, I think it was Alameda, outside of Oakland, right away. And we sat down, we spent the whole day, and she talked and she talked and she talked. And she's really different than Sandra, the other daughter. She was very, this was really tough for her to go back and think about. She was kind of terrified of her dad, but she loved her dad. And the stories she tells were really beautiful. We had a great day. And we packed up, and I thanked her, and her daughter was there. And I thanked them both, her daughter, Sarah, thanked them both. We flew back to Miami. And a few months later, Sarah said that she had basically kind of retreated into a shell and was not really communicating anymore. So, the moral of the story is you have to be really careful when you're a documentarian as to what you're asking people to do, because you need to protect them. They need to trust you. But the second moral of the story is when somebody says they'll talk to you, you get on the plane and you go right away.
Yeah, because could have been a missed opportunity.
Yeah. I'm working on a film now about a woman named Bunny Yeager. Bunny was the first woman photographer for Playboy. She had been a pinup model herself, and she was the one that made the fabulous Betty Page famous from her photos. And I started this film in 2014, and I got my crew, and Bunny was 85, and I got my crew, and we had a 2-day shoot scheduled, and Bunny was supposed to come the first day of the shoot at 10 o'clock. And I said, she's moving a little slow today. Might be there at noon. I said, that's fine. I got other people I'm interviewing. And by the end of the day, Bunny went into the hospital, and she never came out of the hospital again. And so I never got to interview her, which is a tragedy for the film. But we put the film on the shelf for a while. But with the success of The Last Resort, the film we were just talking about, everybody wants more of that Miami nostalgia. So we're working on the film again now. But when you lose an interview like that, let me tell you, you get on the plane right away.
Right. The Bunny Yeager movie has got to be she's got to have a fascinating story.
Bunny's incredible. Bunny is really a reluctant feminist. You wouldn't think that potentially somebody who made their living being a pinup model or made their living photographing pinup models would be perceived as a feminist. But she just wanted to do what the guys did, and she did it, and she did it better. And the women were more comfortable with her when she was, photographing them. And so she got more out of them. She got, really, really great work. But she was tough. And the exchanges between her and Hefner could fill a book. The letters, I have dozens and dozens and dozens of letters between her and Hugh Hefner at Playboy. And it's amazing. So we're excited about continuing with that project. We're in editing now. We had a few more interviews to do, but obviously the pandemic has put a halt to that. But before we did that, we interviewed Larry King because he was a big guy in Miami in the 50s. We interviewed Dita Von Teese, who was the big burlesque queen of our time. She was wonderful. We're having a good time with that one.
The process of gathering information, like all this audio tape of Clyfford Still, and then trying to synthesize it down, that's got to be a pretty arduous task.
It's a arduous task, but it's the most fun. The idea, I enjoy, without question, the research part more than anything else. I love doing the interviews. I'm not used to being on the other side of the mic like I am today. I love doing the interviews. I love digging in with people. I love surprising them when they say, man, you've really, you've done your homework. But going over 700 pages of 50-year-old reel-to-reel tapes, you got, and the other trick is, how do you know when you've got too much in there? How do you know when the audience doesn't want to hear another disembodied quote from Clyfford Still, who sounds like the voice of God? How many of those can you use in the film? Like, I would have used 30, and my partner's like, maybe we'll use 4. I said, how about 6? So there's that negotiation. I work a lot with co-directors because I enjoy it so much. Just like you guys have a partnership that, really works. It's the research is wonderful, and the finding out of things. The other thing about documentary films is it's not like shooting a narrative film where you gather the cast and crew for 14 days, shoot, and then go to the edit room. The nicer thing about the documentary film is you go do an interview in Denver, then you come home. And then you go do an interview in New York, and then you come home. And during that time period, what you're doing percolates out, and you give the public a chance to come to you and say, I knew Clyfford Still, or, I had dinner with Clyfford Still. And so it helps you that you're not just doing it over a 14-day blitz. And many, many things come late in the process that you can just barely squeeze into the film. Dean, in his interview with you guys, was talking about a woman named Deborah Buck. He didn't say her by name, but she lived in Maryland and wanted to be a painter, and Still and her father would casually have breakfast sometimes. And when Still received this huge award from Skowhegan, he had the right to give one Skowhegan scholarship to an artist. And people think, well, he's going to pick somebody famous or this. He picked Deborah Buck at age 17. And so Deborah and I, just before the pandemic began, she lives in the Hamptons, and we were at the Parish Art Museum. We showed the film, and Deborah and I did a talk, and she was talking about how she met Still and what he meant to her. And her practice is beautiful. She's a great artist. But that was a really seminal moment in her life. So you never know what's going to come up when you're doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
So what I love about that Lifeline movie is that it wasn't all just about his art. You sprinkled just enough in there for people to want to explore his art life, but it was more of a study of the man himself and kind of humanizing him of who he was, and then talking about how much integrity as an artist he was. Was that your decision? Was it a joint decision between you and the other director?
I went into the film thinking of this guy as a hero of mine. And you don't know what you're going to find out when you start digging in and you start looking at his life. And I came out of the film thinking of him as a hero of mine. Mm-hmm. He has clearly lived a life of integrity. He's turned down the most important opportunities in American art. He was asked to do the Venice Biennale, the American Pavilion, which the government picks. He was asked to do that, I think, 3 times. And he turned it down every single time. He thought it was not a becoming of his work. He fought for the idea to have his work seen in its own gallery when he was in a museum show, even a group show. But he didn't just fight for himself. When they were doing 16 Americans, which is a very famous show at the Museum of Modern Art, that he and Rothko were both invited to do, he fought for himself. He also fought for Rothko. He felt like his art was best seen in a group setting, not hodgepodge one after the other with 17 different artists on a wall. His daughter called it, she said he didn't like a beef stew, with a little bit of carrots and a little bit of potatoes. I love that quote. And so when you think about what he gave up for his art, he had a clear, dynamic, singular vision about what he was trying to accomplish. And in the film, Sandra says something very beautiful. She says, this painting is, and we'll go back to opera again, because I do love the opera. This painting was an aria, and this painting was an aria. But together they were an opera. And so he didn't want his work to be kind of parceled out all over the place. And frankly, he is the only artist in the last 150 years of any importance to be able to have more than 94% of his work intact. That never happens because people sell art, they give art away, etc. And he had a plan. He had a grand scheme. He gave work to the Albright Knox, and that was a very tactical decision because the Albright Knox was in New York, but it wasn't in New York City. And he didn't think much of the folks in New York City and the way the art world worked in New York City. So you could go see it in Buffalo. Then he went to the West Coast where he had good success and was the premier artist on the West Coast for decades. And he gave 28 paintings to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. He had a strategy for what he was doing. And it always was a strategy about honoring how he felt the work needed to be seen, how he felt the work needed to be represented. It killed him to sell art, and they lived very frugally. I had his wife's 14-column, being an accounting person, I love the 14-column budgets. I mean, literally the year-by-year budgets, and she would write down every single penny. And he would sell work. He sold, I don't know, a couple hundred works, maybe, not even 160 or something like that. When they needed money, he would sell the work. But he so was anguished about selling the work that he would then immediately go and paint what he called replicas. He would paint the work again, but in a slightly different way. And Dean did a beautiful show at the Clyfford Still Museum of the replicas side by side. And so, I mean, he really had a vision about what he wanted to do, and he stuck to it and wouldn't let anybody else convince him otherwise. So I came out of the film at the end of it hoping that I represented that in him. And I think Dean, you don't want to disappoint the museum because they're the ones taking a chance on a filmmaker. I think Dean feels like we discovered a lot about him that even Dean didn't know. And the art world has embraced the film. That's the nicest thing, because I'm a creature of the contemporary art world and have been for many years. The art world has definitely embraced the film. And that's been really nice, really nice.
The interesting, after watching your documentary about Clyfford Still, the interesting thing for me is I've never really been a great fan of abstract expressionism, but I came away with an appreciation of not only him and really discovering him from that. Everything that they were doing at the time, which was so different.
Yeah.
So I've become, I guess, a born again fan, so I appreciate the film.
One of the things that we tried to do in the film is to try to show people the transition between figurative work and abstract. So there's that one painting in the film in which he talks about shucking wheat until the blood ran down my arms. And you do that close up of that. And then suddenly you cut to an abstract painting and you can at least see his transition in his brain, how he becomes more and more reductive and less obvious. And that's something that anybody can learn by watching the film and by going to the museum and seeing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Dennis, have you listened to all 34 hours of that audio?
I have. I've listened to them. I've read the transcripts over and over. I have to say that maybe other than Dean and David Anfam, who is the senior consulting curator there, he's the best known curator of abstract expressionism in the world. I probably spent more time with Clyfford Still in his archives than anybody. But it's the joy of getting deep into something and really learning a lot. One of the things I learned is that Clyfford Still didn't think that his contemporaries were Rothko and Pollock and Motherwell. He thought his contemporaries were Blake and Goya, and he really felt like he should be considered on that level. And there you go. The painter has to believe that he's the only artist in the world if he's going to create greatness.
He was the most prolific towards the end of his life after he had decided that he didn't want to be part of the normal art world with the galleries and the big shows and all that. And then he kind of exiled himself to Maryland where he could just be in peace and paint. Listening to those tapes, do you ever get a sense that he was ever regretful or resentful of his peers for their popularity and their fame in the art world?
I don't think so. I think that one of the things he knew was that if he wanted to sell 20 paintings next Tuesday, there were 20 buyers. And I think what really summarized for him, what really brought his career together is right at the end of his life, the Metropolitan Museum show. That validated him as the greatest living artist because that was the biggest exhibition by a living artist ever at the Met. And the Met is Mecca if you're a visual artist. So for him, that coming when it did, when he was already ill, he was very close to the end of his life, it was very much of a summation for him. The interesting thing about that show is, like most shows, Still did not respond to any kind of curatorial request. And the show had a lot of late paintings in it. And some would say, I'm not a curator, so I'm not somebody who can draw these conclusions. But some would say there were too many late paintings in that show and that there were too many of the paintings that didn't reflect 1947, 1948, 1950, 1953, the paintings like Big Blue or things like that. But that was him, that he really felt like whatever he was doing at the time was the best. So no, I don't think I want to take that back on one statement. In the film, Sandra, I think it is. I don't remember if it's Sandra or Diane. In the film, one of the daughters says she was alone with him one night in New York, and it was late at night, and she woke up and she went to him and she saw he was kind of, he was remorseful a little bit, or he was struggling a little bit. And he said, I might as well just burn all these paintings. They just don't understand me. So I'm guessing he had a lot of inner doubt. But if you listen to the tapes, he doesn't express it in any way, shape, or form. He's always confident. He's always challenging the contemporary art world. And he felt like the people who he thought would be his peers, like Rothko in particular, that they sold out to the machine. That there was this circle of curators and critics and dealers and press that were making people like, Pollock, Rothko, Motherwell, Barnett Newman, who he abhorred. He hated Newman. So he just felt like that wasn't the path for him. But he always knew that he had the power to sell work anytime he wanted to. Anytime he wanted a new Jaguar, the guy loved cars. Anytime he wanted a new Jaguar, he'd sell a painting, So
that's awesome.
I love that you show that in that documentary, his love of cars, and then you get the sense that he loves baseball. And I love how I can't remember who was talking about it, but you kind of make an analogy between baseball and his artwork and why people thought he was so enamored with baseball, because it really kind of connected with what he did as an artist.
One of the great moments in the film is I got to interview a gentleman named Jeffrey Loria. Jeffrey Loria was the former owner of the Miami Marlins, my home team, who, by the way, are 7-1 today, believe it or not, and have used 43 players already in their roster. You can cut that out, Wes. But I got to interview Jeffrey Loria, the then owner of the Miami Marlins, and Jeffrey Loria was also a big time art dealer. He's a big gallerist and he owned a lot of art. And him talking about trying to get work from Still and how hard he had to work at it. And the reason Still eventually wound up selling him paintings, I think, is because they both had a big love of baseball and they would talk baseball all the time. And Jeffrey Loria said to me off camera that other than his father, Clyfford Still was the most important person in his life. And that he had just established the kind of relationship with him and valued his integrity so much. And he saw that. So they really bonded over baseball. Still played, I think, first base. And he always used to love to look at the spaces in between the players. And if you look at the paintings, sometimes you see that the daubs of paint and the late paintings, that's not really what you're looking at. You're looking at the interstitials, if you will, the places in between where the colors are. So, yeah, baseball was very meaningful to him.
I loved his quote where he said when Clyfford would say no, it was just one more impediment to getting him to say yes.
Jeffrey Loria is known as being a very savvy, very tenacious gallerist, and he has been great with me. He came to the showing of the film at the Parish, and you're a little concerned when you interview a subject and then you put it in the film and what they're going to think. I was very nervous about what Sandra would think, and I was very nervous about what Jeffrey would think. And they both loved it. And I wasn't easy on them. I mean, when they said something harsh, sometimes I put it in the film, but they both loved it. And they both knew how much I cared about the subject. And so did they. And so that comes through.
So what do you love about making these documentaries? Is it the education of learning about a particular subject that you didn't know about previous? Is it just that human connection with people? What do you like about doing this?
I think that the thing I enjoy the most, and I'm a very specific documentarian. All of my documentaries are about culture, about the arts, and virtually all of them have been about finding somebody who either had a moment and it went away, had a big moment and it went away, or finding somebody who's about to have a big moment. So Deep City, the birth of the Miami Sound, was about soul music in Miami in the 1960s. And they had an unbelievable sound. They could have easily gone toe to toe with Motown. And because of the racist behavior in the industry, they couldn't get their records out of South Florida. And so they all went back after a number of years and became bus drivers and school teachers and things like that. I was never prouder than the night we debuted the film at the Miami International Film Festival and got them all up on stage. And some of them were very, very old at that point, but got them all up on stage and the audience just went crazy. So it's about telling a story about somebody who's been forgotten, maybe. I told the story, The Queen of Thursdays, about a ballerina from Cuba who had risen very high up in the Cuban National Ballet, which is one of the great ballet companies in the world. But the woman above her, the very famous Alicia Alonso, who's just passed away in the last year, thought she was too good and kept pushing her over to the programs on Thursday, when that's not when the fancy people came. But the cognoscenti knew that Thursday was the time to go to the ballet if you wanted to see a great dancer. So Rosario Suarez, the protagonist of my film, her name was Charin, was her nickname. So she was called the Queen of Thursdays because that's when you could go see really some kick-ass ballet. And she came after a very difficult time there. She came to Miami, tried to start a couple of ballet companies. And when I interviewed her, she's giving dance lessons for $15 an hour. I mean, so there's this rise, and then there's stress, and then hopefully you give those artists a bit of a coda, a bit of a moment where they're recognized again. So I get a lot of joy out of that. That's my practice, really. I mean, that is my film practice. Clyfford Still is a good example. Super famous in the 40s and 50s, forgotten in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And here we are, and at least we're still talking about him. And so is the art world now. I think the film has really helped. I think I heard Dean. I was kind of proud. I was listening to the one you did with Dean a number of weeks ago, and Dean said he really felt like the film has brought a lot of attention to Still again. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. That's how I look for a film. It's how I try to give somebody the attention that I think they probably deserve.
Lifeline was slated to do a 50-city tour before the pandemic, and you got to screen it one time?
3 times.
3 times?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've been able to find other outlets. Wes early on mentioned that you can find it on Amazon Prime. And there's also a website called Kino Lorber where I actually rented the movie. Is it hard to make money with a documentary? Because you have to at least make your money back. And I know
you do? You can do that?
and this is where we're going. So I wrote a quote from you, and I don't remember where it was, but you said that, basically said money's overrated. Obviously, this is a passion for you, but you have a huge crew. I mean, films take a crew, even if it's a small production, to facilitate the making of it. So is the streaming platform a good way to make your money back? Is it better than, say, like Spotify for musicians? Is it a little bit easier to make your money back on a film, at least to cover your costs?
I don't really think so much about recovery once the films are done. You have to find a way to get the film made. And sometimes that's grants from foundations. Sometimes there are patrons that will help you. I'm really happy to say that the executive producers of Lifeline, Lanny and Sharon Martin, who are huge patrons in this community, to the museum, to the Denver Art Museum, to so many cultural things and other things, that they were kind enough to help with the film. So once you get the film made, yeah, it's nice if you can get some kind of financial return, but it just goes into the next film, frankly. I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that, honestly. I'm trying to get the films made. They're expensive. You said it yourself. The travel, the crews, the post-production is where it's turning out to be really expensive. But it's okay. I mean, it's just something I want to do. It's something I'm really passionate about. It's something I love doing with my crew. I have a wonderful group of people that really know what they're doing. I'm not working with a lot of 18-year-olds. I've got I've got a wonderful cinematographer. I've got a great editor. My co-directors are generally people that have been in the industry for quite a while. And my job is to just make sure that they get to do their work, that they can get paid enough to keep going. and just keep it going. The Last Resort turned out to actually be a really successful film economically, but I'd never had that happen before, and it probably will never happen again. The still film, the Lifeline, is great because you can see it on streaming right away. Our plan was you do your festivals, you go to film festivals all over the world, then you we were going to do a year of museums, because every time you do a film, you have to ask yourself, who's your audience? Just like you guys do with the podcast. Who is your audience? Who are you really trying to get to see this film? We focused all of our energy on the art world. We didn't focus it on the documentary film world, because the documentary film world is, they're interested in other things right now. And that's okay. I mean, that's how it works. But we knew the contemporary art world was interested in what we were doing, and we lined up all these great museum screenings, and then they were gone. One day they were there, and the next day they weren't. So what do? I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, and you pivot. You pivot to something else. So we immediately pivoted to kinonow.com, which is where you can see the film. We have a wonderful, legendary indie distributor that represents us that you mentioned, which is Kino Lorber. And you can see the film there. You can go to Amazon Prime. You can go to iTunes, and that's great. The film is screening tonight in Tel Aviv. I had hoped to be there, but it's just not working out that way. So you just have to keep going. I don't really make films for an expectation of financial return. When it happens, it's great. And we just take the money, we put it into the next film. When it doesn't happen, then when you get to the next one, you got to find a way to generate the dollars to make the film. That's it. They're all passion projects. They are. What do you call a independent documentary filmmaker?
I don't know.
Broke.
Unemployed.
Unemployed.
That's a doc joke for those of you out there. So yeah, I mean, it's there are people that do it, and they do it economically and things like that. For me to do that, I would have to tell stories instead of the stories I choose. Mm-hmm. The nice thing about what I'm doing and the way I'm doing it is they're my stories. If people don't care about them, I'm okay with that. I'm not having stories chosen for me that I am making because people will think they will do better than the stories I'd like to tell. And again, when you're telling stories of people that are a little forgotten or maybe undiscovered yet, you are taking the risk that people don't know about it and don't care. It's much easier to tell a story about Britney Spears than it is to tell a story about somebody who's not known. One of the things I'm learning, though, is it's very important to sprinkle known names into your films. And so if you're a contemporary art nerd like I am, and you hear that Mark Bradford is in the Lifeline film talking about Clyfford Still, Julie Meritu is in it, Julian Schnabel is in it. If you're an art person, you're going, oh, maybe I should watch this because I know who they are. So that helps a lot. And we've started to do that even more aggressively. Plus, these are people that matter and have something to say. So that's always fun.
Yeah. No, those are great pieces too. Bradford's piece talking about wasn't he the one who talked about when the lights went out?
Oh, that's the poet, Tom Healy.
Oh, that's right.
That's the
great
poet.
story.
And of course, Jerry Saltz is in the Lifeline film. Jerry just won the Pulitzer Prize. So I enjoy that part of it. I enjoy that, but I want to tell the stories I want to tell. Yeah. And I'm good if I'm only telling them for me. It's nice when you get a big audience. It's nice when you're on Netflix. But I'm going to tell my stories.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to have that kind of control and be able to do that as an artist. So somebody recently reached out to me and asked, what is your favorite interview that you've done so far? I feel like we take away something from every single interview. So I couldn't really say I have a favorite because I get educated every time out.
Let me start by saying films are really hard to make. Documentary films are really hard to make. People don't understand that. You don't just run out there with a camera and bang around and come back and cut it up and plop it out there. It is very difficult, and getting the rights to make these films are very difficult. Music rights, very difficult. Interview subjects willing to talk to you, very difficult. So you go into each one feeling very excited. And there are really two very fun moments. The first fun moment is before you start shooting and after you lock the film and it's done and you go to the festival opening. In between, we call it the ugly middle, because there's always a moment in every film where you look up and you go, why did I ever think I could do this? This is so hard. This is going horribly. And that's when you have to rely upon the fact that by picking subjects you really, really care about, that gets you to the finish line. You don't want to be making films about people or things you don't care about, because you'll lose your mojo in the middle, and it's hard. I don't. Some films are more fun to make than others. Some go very easily, and some are very, very difficult, like pushing a heavy stone over a line or something. But yeah, it's just like you said. I love the films that I've made because I chose them and because I invested a lot in them. So I'm always looking for those kinds of stories where there's somebody that deserves to be better known, I think is what it comes down to. It's gotten easier because as the films begin to get traction, it's just like you guys with the podcast. It will get easier to get the people you want, because you'll want somebody and you'll say, Dennis, do you know Ai Weiwei? And I'll go, well, I interviewed him. We can ask him. Or do you know Mark Bradford? Or I say, yeah, I know Mark. The more you do, it gets easier for people because they look you up on IMDb, the film kind of the film encyclopedia. And they say, oh, this guy's got 40 film credits. I guess he's a real filmmaker. In the beginning, it was a lot harder to get people to say yes.
Yeah.
So true.
We know that.
We
right?
know it
right? We've been ghosted a couple times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what started you on this path? Because this is a relatively new endeavor in the scheme of things. What got you started making these films?
It's kind of a funny story, actually. I was watching the Obama inauguration, and Aretha Franklin came out, and she had on a crazy hat. It was like this amazing church lady hat, And I said, wow, where does that come from? Like what's the history behind that? I said, I got to do something about that. And I had been doing a little bit of on-camera work with an organization called Plum TV, which was out in Aspen, Vail, Telluride. They came to Miami. They were in the Hamptons, places like that. And I didn't really like being on camera, frankly. Everybody else was telling me what to do. I never liked that. And I have a face made for radio. I was talking about contemporary art, but I had met a guy who's done a lot with me. His name's Marlon Johnson. He's been a great partner. I went to him afterwards and I said, I have this idea. And the next week, when I was at Knight Foundation, we were hosting something called Free Gospel Sunday. And we had a very difficult time in Miami getting the African-American community to come to the Performing Arts Center. They just didn't, even though it was very close to where a lot of our African-American community lived, they just didn't feel welcome. They didn't feel like it was for them. So we did this thing called Free Gospel Sunday. And we would meet folks at the church with a bus and bring them to Free Gospel Sunday. And I was there one day, and it was a few weeks after the inauguration, and these ladies came off the bus, and they were all wearing these crazy hats, these amazingly beautiful hats. And I said, oh, this is a sign. I'm going to do something about this. So Marlon Johnson and I and Chad Tingle, two partners I've made some films with, we made our very first film together, and it's called Sunday's Best. It's a 6-minute film. And we made it, and it was really cool. I enjoyed it all. I enjoyed the editing process. I didn't mind watching the same 6-minute film 150 times, tweaking it here and there each time. And I have a home in Aspen, Colorado, and I called up the person that does the Aspen Shorts Fest, and I said, hey, I made a film. They said, okay. I said, could I show it to you? Maybe you'll put it in the festival. They said, sure, show it to us. I didn't know that it's one of the most important, well, it's probably the most important Shorts Fest in America. I was like, well, I'm in Aspen. They're in Aspen. I'll send them the film. And they watched it and they said, wow, this is really good. We're going to put it in the festival. I said, cool. And then I found out afterwards, like getting in is like the most, they get like 3,000 films and they show like 60, and they weren't doing me a favor. They didn't know me that well. And so the film played there. And then we started to send it around, and it played and it played and it played and played like 30 festivals. And I was like, maybe we got something here. Maybe, maybe there's something going on. But then I gave it to public television. And that has become a very big part of my filmmaking practice, public television. When they first asked for the film, I was like, nobody watches TV anymore. And nobody watches public television. But they were very persistent. This is my hometown station in Miami, WPBT. Great people there. They've so looked after me. So I gave them the film. They put it on TV. And the next month, people were like, hey, I saw your film on TV. I said, you did? I figured like there's like 3 ladies watching it, and that was it. So, oh yeah, we saw your film. We saw your film. We saw your film. I got emails. I was like, maybe people do watch public television. And so I have shown virtually all of my films on public television. Sometimes you can't because of licensing and things like that. But I've shown virtually all of my films on public television, and I've syndicated them across America. And it's a really good way to get, again, particularly if you're not chasing profit, it's a really good way to get eyeballs on your films. I made a film about Wynton Marsalis, the jazz trumpeter. Wynton allowed me to film a particular performance that he was doing. And I put it on my local station. We won one of, I guess now I've won 13 regional Emmys. They have Emmys for like Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, Puerto Rico. It's like a regional contest. And we won a regional Emmy for that film. And then it was syndicated. It has now been shown 6,500 times on public television. And we have been in every major market, all 25 major markets. And we've been in 83% of all of the markets in America. So if you're trying to get your film seen, public television is a miracle. If you are trying to get funded for your film or paid for your film, that's not the route you go. So we've really chosen that route because we're making these films for the protagonists. We want them to be better known, and public television allows us to do that. And it has been just an incredible part of my practice that they have really given me the incentive to keep going. And now they show most everything, we do.
Sounds like a great partnership.
It's great. It's great. And they are welcoming, and they are helpful. And if you are a filmmaker, a beginning filmmaker in particular, and you're not looking at public television, you're making a huge mistake. There's content restrictions and things like that. So you've got to make something that is public television oriented. But I make films about art. And so it has been a glorious partnership, and I am very, very grateful to them.
I haven't watched that Wynton Marsalis documentary yet, but I definitely want to check that out. But I was watching the trailer, and there's a great soundbite, and it made me think about storytelling. But at the end of that trailer, Wynton Marsalis says, we all have a lot more in common than we have different. And I think that's what humans desire. We get a lot of times on this podcast, we try to reach out to people and they're like, I don't know if I want to do it. I don't think I'm that interesting. But I feel like every person has a story. And if you give me an hour or two, you're going to tell me something incredibly interesting that you might not think is interesting, but it is. And to see the connection that we all have, that thread that winds through all of us, I think that's important. And what you're doing is important work as a documentary filmmaker and a storyteller.
Todd's going all spiritual on me now, Wes. You got to help me here.
And what's funny is I was thinking the same thing about leaving a legacy. And we've talked about the podcast because we've interviewed a fair number of people that are in their 80s. And, one day we both kind of came to the realization is like, one day they're not going to be with us, and this will live on, and this will, may tell a story that nobody's heard. So go ahead. I'm sorry, Todd.
No, that's fine. Yeah, that was a good interjection there. And I think it's interesting too, in this, and people in this time, while they're being forced to stay away from other people and don't have their regular outlets, I think these stories are really important to keep people connected. So that's where I was going with, how important this work is that you're doing, Dennis. The other thing is that I think if you spend time, and I love that quote from Wynton Marsalis, I think if you spend time with a person, there's no way that you can dislike or hate another human being. Like once you hear somebody's story, it's like breaking bread with sitting down and sharing a meal with somebody, sharing your story, having that conversation, which doesn't get to happen even before pandemic. We're so caught up in the technology. So documentary filmmaking to me is it's my favorite genre of to watch. The rest of my family will disappear on me if I turn on a documentary, but I love to hear the story. That story obviously resonates with you being a filmmaker. Do you think that maybe this pandemic will kind of bring us back full circle and we'll have more of a human connection?
I'm not sure. I think that for some of us, this has been a reset point. It's made me certainly slow down a little bit, which is not something I've spent a lot of my life doing. And I've actually gotten a lot of joy out of slowing down a little bit. That was a big surprise to me. But I do believe that we'll go right back to the industrial complex and the advertising that is pushing us to go, places and directions and things. Are we going to want to live slightly smaller lives based upon knowing that we can after this time? I'm not really sure. My experience has been whenever we say it's different this time, I'm going to print a T-shirt that says it's never different this time. I'm just not sure that we'll come out of this and take the lessons learned per se as a nation or as a globe and really begin to kind of stop and smell the roses a little bit more. Not sure. It has been a great moment, as Wes was raising before, for documentary, because we're consuming the moving image in a different way now. And the ability to go on Hulu, Netflix, Prime, iTunes, and choose with equal dignity a documentary or a narrative film, a blockbuster or a small, quiet, last resort type of film. And they're right next to each other, and you can choose like that. And you don't have the megaplex or the Hollywood studios running you over with advertising and things like that. So that has elevated the documentary story quite a bit, and people are choosing. They're embracing that and saying, maybe I don't need to see Iron Man against Ant-Man or something like that. Maybe I can watch a story that is different, warmer sometimes. So yeah, I think that's been a great moment for documentary filmmaking, and will continue, because now that you've been driven in that way, you'll be more willing to embrace it.
And we're fastly running out of content to binge watch. So I think now people are going and exploring other things, right?
Well, I will give a shout out. Kareem Tabsh, who I made The Last Resort with, has just come out with his two co-directors with a film that I strongly recommend. It's called Mucho, Mucho Amor. And it's the story of Walter Mercado. And Walter Mercado was the astrologer to the Latin community. And it's a beautiful, beautiful film. The other one is, I just mentioned my collaborator, Marlon Johnson. He just came out with a film with his collaborators, Ann Flette and Owsley Brown III. It's called River City Drum Corps. And it just got picked yesterday by the New York Times as a critic's pick. So all docs, all beautiful. Proud of my friends for making some great, great stuff this year, getting through it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about The Last Resort, because I literally just watched that yesterday evening. I'd sent Wes a link to the interview that you did with that gentleman from, what is his name?
Oh, yes. Eric Goldberg from Jewish Public Television in New York City.
And it was a wonderful interview that you had with him. And so I was like, wow, this looks like a great movie. I didn't realize it was on Netflix. And then Wes watched it and he's like, hey, you got to check this out. This is a really nicely done documentary. So I checked it out last night, and I was actually really floored by it. It was such a great story because, and in that interview, you talked about how, and I imagine this happens a lot in documentaries, but you start off on this path And then all of a sudden you realize that there's something else to be explored. And so really there's like 3 different stories in this doc that you talk about. It's this retired Jewish community that was vibrant and fun and just living it up, in the tail end of the last chapter of their lives. You have the story of South Beach and how it has evolved over time. And then you have the story of these 2 amazing gentlemen that are photographers and decided that they were going to join together and document this whole culture. They had the foresight to see that this wasn't going to last forever. And this was an important moment and a place that they lived and knew about. What was the impetus to make that movie?
So I made that film with a gentleman named Kareem Tabsh, and he and I had always talked about making a film together, and we just never got to it. He runs the independent cinema in South Florida, in Miami. And we got together one day, and I said, well, if we were going to make a film, what would you make a film about? He said, well, what would you make a film about? And I said, well, let's write it down. And we both wanted to make a film about Andy Sweet, the photographer in the film. He's the protagonist, along with Gary Monroe, his photography partner, if you will. They had this project together. And the interesting thing about the film is I approached it in the way that I was just describing to you. Here are 2 guys that have kind of not gotten credit for what they did. Really beautiful idea. Pictures are great. We're going to make the pictures the star of the film. And, Andy passed away tragically, et cetera. And as we got into it, just the opposite happened. And what really became the story is this microcosm, this elderly Jewish population on South Beach that had an incredible story to tell. And then as that community began to disappear and was replaced, you would lose an 85-year-old living in a solo room in a hotel, and you would replace them with a 23-year-old model rollerblading. And that was the story of South Beach. And I knew that story because I was one of the first redevelopers on South Beach with my wife, Deborah. We bought 20 Art Deco apartment buildings and we renovated them, and we were the ones housing the 23-year-old rollerbladers. And so we knew right away that we had to pivot the story. And while we do tell Andy's story and we do tell Gary's story, the real story was this moment in time and like frozen in amber via Andy's photographs and via Gary's photographs. And we hit a chord. We struck a chord in America. It was astounding because everybody's Nana had lived in South Beach. And everybody's Zadie and everybody's Booby had lived in South Beach. And everybody had gone down there to see them. People were stopping the street and saying, you ought to make a film about my grandmother, because, so it was great. And it caught on in a way that it wasn't just a niche film. You didn't have to be Jewish to go see the film, although every Jewish person I knew wanted to see the film. Thank you very much, which was phenomenal. But then the film caught on across America, and we did 18 weeks in theaters. And we won the Miami Jewish Film Festival, which is the second largest film festival in America.
Wow.
And Netflix came calling. And so it was a real surreal moment for us. It was not like anything I've ever had happen before with my very limited filmmaking. And it was about really tapping into a certain zeitgeist in people's hearts. Mm-hmm. And we took advantage of that and got the film out for people to see. And our friends at Kino Lorber did a wonderful job positioning the film. And it's still playing. We just licensed the film to the German-speaking countries in Europe. A distributor called up, and so it's going to play over there a long, long time too.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it's been a really interesting and fun ride. And I'm really appreciative because you don't always have that kind of thing happen when you're making very, very low budget films. It's hard to make a low budget film that gets that kind of run. but we did. And of course, the other thing that's nice about it is that's my town. I live in Miami Beach. I live in South Beach, and I knew the story well. I actually met Andy once or twice, and I knew Gary very well. And yet, despite the fact that it was kind of a personal acquaintance story, it was big enough for. I always say I want to make films about my community that my community will enjoy, but that will also resonate on a national and international level. And that's what we always try to do when we make a film, is we need to try to find something that's important to us, but that will work for everybody. That is big enough that people can be curious about it and join in and share it with us.
From a photographer's viewpoint, it was a really great story just hearing about these two photographers that I didn't know about and seeing their work. And especially, I very much resonate with black and white photography.
Well, I was going to say, being a professional photographer, Andy's practice must have drove you crazy, because he was just a boom, point and shoot, point and shoot.
We talked about that today. And what's funny is I kind of gravitate towards Gary, right? And he gravitated towards Andy. And I thought that was interesting.
That is interesting to me, because Gary, who I spoke to this week, he is the quintessential traditional shooter. You know, he's got Fulbright scholarships. He's been to Haiti to shoot 25 times. He's got bodies of work. He shot 14,000 photos, that he's actually printed. So, he's a classic fine art photographer. And Andy would come out in the morning hungover and just go boom, boom, and it would be a miracle. Yeah. The other thing interesting about Andy that Gary used to drive him crazy, is that Andy would go into he would go into the dark room to print, and he'd print 50 photos, and 47 of them would be keepers. He said he was just so good at printing that he was able to really create something out of nothing sometimes. So.
What I loved about Andy's photography is not only, and that story, our listeners, you really have to look this up on Netflix, The Last Resort. Check it out. It's a beautiful story, and like we said, multifaceted. But Gary made the comment that, and then I think the gentleman's name is Stan Hughes, that's doing the restoration of Andy's photography, or has. They're talking about his composition. And initially when I saw it, I was like, and I think it was some photos that were in the trailer itself, but I didn't actually see the same photos maybe in the movie, and maybe I'm wrong on that. But I was like, no, this is exactly what this guy was about. They're composed perfectly. And the fact that he had trained his eye and his brain with a Hasselblad, hand holding a Hasselblad, he's shooting medium format and really just doing basically street photography, like a Cartier-Bresson style of photography with a medium format camera. He knew exactly when that decisive moment was, and he just pop it up to his eye and click, and boom, he was off and running again. And so I had a real appreciation. That guy is magnificent. Yeah. Like I'm going to have to, there's a book out, right?
Yeah, now, there's a book. There's a second one coming also. It's with Letter 16 Press, are the name of the guys that did the book. I put them together with Andy's sister, who has the estate, and they've done a book. And in fact, if you go to this week's New Yorker, there's a brand new book about Andy's photographs when he was even younger and he went to camp. Everybody went. I never went to camp, but when you went to camp, my wife went to camp. She loved camp. She'd still be in camp if they'd let her. But it's called Hello Mutta, Hello Fata. And there's a beautiful review of it in this week's New Yorker. And it's about Andy's camp photos.
And you show some of those in the movie. And I was like, wow, this guy was good even at a young age. I mean, he's capturing like these intimate, special moments. And it's just a small part in the movie where you're talking about, how he got into photography and how he was the camp photographer. But those photos are amazing. So I'm going to seek that out as well.
Guy never went anywhere without a camera around his neck. In fact, when I would ask people about him, because he was known on Miami Beach, his father was a municipal judge, and they were fairly prominent on Miami Beach, people say, "Oh yeah, the kid with the camera, that guy." Yeah.
Well, Dennis, thank you so much for the time. I know you need to get rolling. We didn't even get a chance to talk about art collecting, which maybe sometime in the future we can just allocate an episode just to the collection of art, because I'd love to talk to you about that.
That would definitely be a long episode. I have been collecting art now for 42 years, and I did the math a little while ago, and I figured out that Deborah and I have acquired a work of art every week for the last 42 years. Wow. So we actually buy something every week. That is a very bad Jones, as they say.
And you collect together. You're a team.
100%.
I mean, not only are you married for 39 years, but you're a team in this. So maybe what we need to do is do an episode where we have you and your wife, Deborah, on, and we talk about collection. What do you think about that?
I'll try and convince her. She is happy to have me do the talking. She's the brains of the operation. I do the talking.
Oh,
well, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for allowing us your time.
Well, congratulations to you guys. You're tapping into a place in the art world that isn't talked about very much. And what I mean by that is you two don't come here and represent yourself as some big time art curators or things like that. You are really interested in the art world in a way that is open to your listeners, where they're hearing it through your eyes and your ears. And I think that's really important. The art world can be a very intimidating place. And it's important to have opportunities like this where people can listen and learn and not feel like they have to know a lot to be engaged in the art world, because you don't. You can really just think about what you like and build your knowledge and those kinds of things. So I'd be happy to come back, and Deborah and I will sit down and do that with you. We would love that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, for the Tenet Podcast, I'm Todd Pearson.
And I'm Wes Brown.
Have a great week.
You guys have done that before.
Yeah, we keep it.